Sacramento, city of trees, capital of California, and a chilling nexus of spectral activity. Beneath its sun-drenched facade, whispers of the departed linger, shadows stretch, and history's restless souls refuse to fade. Dare to explore the city's dark heart. We unveil the top 15 haunted places that will make you question everything you thought you knew about the Golden State. 1. Sacramento City Cemetery, Sacramento. Beneath the quiet canopy of ancient oaks, Sacramento City Cemetery appears peaceful at first glance. Rows of weathered headstones, faded names, and forgotten dates stretching back to the gold rush era. But when the sun sinks behind the trees, the air changes. Visitors have reported a sudden drop in temperature, the sound of footsteps crunching on gravel when no one is there, and faint whispers carried on a wind that isn't blowing. Some believe the spirits of pioneers, victims of disease, and restless souls from Sacramento's earliest days never truly left. Paranormal investigators claim their recorders have captured disembodied voices calling out names, while others describe shadowy figures moving between graves just beyond the reach of lantern light. Skeptics argue it's suggestion, imagination fueled by history. But how do you explain photographs showing unexplained mists coiling around specific headstones, or the recurring sensation of being watched near the older sections of the cemetery? The cemetery holds over a century of tragedy, hardship, and untold stories buried beneath the soil. Every monument marks not just a life lived, but sometimes a death that came too suddenly, too violently, or too unfairly. Perhaps that emotional residue lingers, imprinting itself on the grounds, or perhaps something more conscious roams after dark. The next time you find yourself walking those silent paths, ask yourself, if you hear your name whispered from behind a crumbling marble stone, would you turn around? 2. California State Library, Sacramento. By day, the California State Library stands as a monument to knowledge-quiet halls, towering shelves, and the soft echo of turning pages. But when the doors close and the last footsteps fade, the building tells a different story. Staff members have long whispered about lights flickering in sealed rooms, books found scattered across tables that were left perfectly arranged, and the unmistakable sound of footsteps pacing between aisles long after security has cleared the floors. Some believe the spirits of former librarians and researchers linger, unwilling to abandon the work they devoted their lives to. Others point to darker rumors, accounts of a shadowy figure seen on the upper levels, watching from behind iron railings before vanishing into the stacks. Paranormal investigators claim to have captured unexplained electronic voice phenomena, faint murmurs that sound like hushed reading, or a sharp shh as if silencing intruders. Skeptics argue old buildings creak and settle, that imagination fills in the blanks. But how do you explain security alarms triggered in empty archival rooms, or elevators summoned to floors where no one waits? The library safeguards centuries of California's history wars, scandals, unsolved crimes, stories heavy with emotion and unfinished endings. Perhaps that collective memory leaves an imprint, replaying fragments of the past in the stillness of night. Or perhaps something more deliberate walks those marble corridors after midnight. If you ever find yourself alone between those endless shelves and hear a book fall behind you, will you dismiss it as gravity or wonder who just pulled it down? 3. Eagle Theater, Sacramento. The Eagle Theater stands as a proud relic of Sacramento's gold rush era, its brick facade glowing warmly under streetlights in old Sacramento. But when darkness settles, the stage feels less like a landmark and more like a portal to the past. Built in 1849, it has witnessed fortune, failure, fire, and rebirth. And some believe not every performer ever took their final bow. Staff members and visitors have reported the sound of applause echoing through the empty auditorium, faint but unmistakable, as if an invisible audience still demands one more show. Others speak of a lone figure in period clothing standing near the balcony rail, vanishing the moment someone approaches. Doors open softly on their own. Footsteps cross the wooden stage when no one is there. Skeptics blame shifting timber and theatrical imagination. But how do you explain cold spots that linger center stage? Or security cameras capturing unexplained shadows drifting across velvet curtains? Some paranormal investigators claim to have recorded whispers backstage, voices murmuring lines from forgotten scripts. Perhaps it's residual energy, replaying scenes from a century ago. Or perhaps a restless actor refuses to leave the spotlight behind. If you stood alone beneath those dimmed chandeliers and heard the curtains rustle without a breeze, would you convince yourself it's just the building settling, or wonder who is waiting in the wings for their final encore? Four, Delta King riverboat. Sacramento. Moored quietly along the Sacramento River, the Delta King riverboat looks like a frozen piece of history. Its white hull glowing under dock lights, its decks polished and still. But when midnight settles over the water, the silence aboard this former 1920s luxury steamer feels heavy, almost watchful. Guests have reported the sound of children running down empty corridors, sudden knocks on cabin doors with no one outside, and the faint echo of laughter drifting through the stairwells. One room in particular is whispered about a cabin where lights flicker, faucets turn on by themselves, and unseen hands tug gently at blankets in the dark. Some believe the spirit of a young girl, said to have died tragically on board decades ago, still wanders the narrow passageways. Others claim to have seen a shadowed figure standing at the end of the hall, dressed in outdated attire, vanishing as quickly as it appears. Skeptics argue it's the creaking of an aging vessel, the river shifting beneath its weight. But how do you explain multiple guests describing the same cold spot near the grand staircase, or security staff hearing footsteps pacing the deck long after everyone has gone to sleep? The Delta King has survived floods, bankruptcy, and abandonment. Perhaps the past never truly disembarked. If you spent a night in one of its vintage cabins and heard slow footsteps stop outside your door, would you dare to open it and see who's still aboard? Five, Iceland skating rink, Sacramento. By day, Iceland skating rink once echoed with music, laughter, and the sharp scrape of blades cutting across ice. Families gathered under bright lights, teenagers raced in circles, and the cold air carried nothing but excitement. But when the crowds disappeared and the building grew older, a different chill settled in, one that didn't come from the frozen floor. Former employees have spoken of hearing skates gliding across the rink long after the compressors were shut down. The unmistakable rhythmic carving of ice in a building locked and empty. Security guards described motion sensors triggering in the middle of the night. Yet cameras revealed nothing but faint, shifting shadows near center ice. Some claim to have seen a lone skater tracing slow circles under dim emergency lighting, vanishing the moment someone steps closer. Skeptics argue it's acoustics, metal beams contracting, wind rattling loose panels. But how do you explain the recurring reports of cold spots far below normal temperatures, or the sensation of being followed along the upper viewing gallery? Legends whisper of accidents and injuries that left emotional scars embedded in the rink's frozen surface, as if every fall imprinted something unseen into the ice. Perhaps it's residual energy replaying moments of impact, or perhaps something still glides silently after closing time, waiting for the music to start again. If you stood alone at center rink in the dark and heard the slow scrape of blades circling behind you, would you turn to see who's skating, or hope you never find out? Six, Sacramento Theater Company, Sacramento. When the house lights dim inside the Sacramento Theater Company, the silence feels charged, like the stage itself is holding its breath. By day, it is a place of rehearsals scripts, and standing ovations. But after the final curtain falls and the cast goes home, something else is said to linger in the wings. Actors have reported hearing soft footsteps crossing the stage long after it's cleared. The faint rustle of costumes brushing against curtains that hang perfectly still. Some swear they've seen a shadow seated alone in the back row during late rehearsals, motionless, watching only to disappear when approached. Stage lights flicker without warning. Props are found rearranged. Dressing room mirrors seem to reflect movement that isn't there. Skeptics insist it's old wiring, overactive imaginations, fueled by theatrical atmosphere. But how do you explain multiple performers describing the same cold draft sweeping across center stage at the exact same mark in different productions? Paranormal enthusiasts believe the building has absorbed decades of intense emotion, joy, grief, desperation, each performance leaving behind a trace. Perhaps the energy replays itself, like an endless encore, or perhaps a former actor, unwilling to surrender the spotlight, still waits for applause that never came. If you stood alone under those dim stage lights and heard a whisper deliver a line from behind you, would you bow, or would you run before the final act begins? Seven, California State Capitol, Sacramento, rising beneath its iconic dome. The California State Capitol commands authority by day lawmakers debating, tourists wandering marble corridors, history preserved behind glass. But when night settles over the building and the echo of footsteps fades, a different presence is said to linger within its grand halls. Security staff have reported hearing doors close softly in empty chambers. The faint murmur of voices drifting from the assembly floor long after sessions have adjourned. Some claim to have seen a solitary figure standing near the old legislative desks, dressed in outdated attire, only to vanish as lights flicker overhead. Others describe cold drafts spiraling down staircases where no windows are open, and the unsettling sensation of being watched from the balcony. Skeptics argue it's the natural acoustics of a historic structure, the creak of aging wood beneath polished stone. But how do you explain motion alarms triggered in locked committee rooms, or repeated sightings of a shadow crossing the rotunda beneath the dome? The Capitol has witnessed fierce debates, political betrayals, and moments that shaped California's future emotions intense enough to leave an imprint. Perhaps those charged decisions never fully dissipated, replaying in fragments after midnight, or perhaps something more deliberate walks those corridors of power, bound to unfinished business. If you found yourself alone beneath that towering dome and heard quiet footsteps approaching from behind, would you assume it's just history echoing back, or wonder who still refuses to leave the chamber? 8. Stanford Mansion, Sacramento. Behind its ornate iron gates and towering windows, the Stanford Mansion stands as a monument to wealth and power, once home to railroad magnate Leland Stanford. By daylight, its polished floors and grand staircases tell a story of ambition and political influence. But when the final tour ends and the lights dim, the mansion feels less like a preserved landmark and more like a house that remembers. Staff members have quietly described doors creaking open in sealed rooms, chandeliers swaying without a breeze, and the faint sound of footsteps descending the staircase long after everyone has left. Some claim to have seen a well-dressed figure standing in an upstairs window, gazing out toward the street before fading into shadow. Others speak of sudden cold spots that gather in the formal dining room, as if an unseen guest has taken a seat at the table. Skeptics insist it's the natural settling of an aging structure, the echo of traffic outside. But how do you explain security alarms triggered in empty parlors, or the recurring sensation of being watched in the master bedroom? The mansion has witnessed political strategy, personal loss, and the quiet tensions of a powerful household. Perhaps those emotions never truly vanished, clinging to the carved wood and velvet drapes. Or perhaps someone who once ruled these halls still walks them, unwilling to surrender the grandeur. If you stood alone beneath that sweeping staircase and heard a slow, deliberate step above you, Would you climb to investigate or leave before the house decides to acknowledge your presence? Nine, the Vernon Brannon House, Sacramento. Tucked away behind aging trees and quiet streets. The Vernon Brannon House doesn't demand attention, but it doesn't need to. Those who pass by often describe an uneasy feeling, as if the structure itself is watching. Built decades ago, the house has changed hands multiple times. Yet stories persist of unexplained disturbances that refuse to fade with new ownership. Former residents have reported hearing deliberate footsteps moving across hardwood floors in the dead of night, stopping just outside bedroom doors. Others speak of doors slowly creaking open despite being locked, and lights flickering in rooms no one has entered for hours. One account describes the faint outline of a figure standing at the top of the staircase, motionless, silent before dissolving into shadow when approached. Skeptics point to old wiring, settling foundations, the power of suggestion, but how do you explain multiple witnesses describing the same cold spot in the hallway? Or the repeated sensation of someone standing just behind you when the room is empty? Some believe the house carries emotional residue from past tragedies, moments of grief imprinted into its walls. Perhaps it's residual energy replaying fragments of memory, or perhaps something more aware lingers within, unwilling to relinquish its claim. If you found yourself alone inside and heard a slow knock from the other side of a locked door, would you convince yourself it's the house settling or wonder who's asking to be let in? Then, California State Railroad Museum, Sacramento. By day, the California State Railroad Museum is filled with the grandeur of restored locomotives and the echoes of industrial triumph. Massive engines frozen in time beneath high wooden rafters. But when evening falls and the last visitors leave, the stillness between those steel giants feels different, almost charged. Staff members have reported hearing metallic clanks deep within the exhibit hall, long after closing, as if unseen hands are testing couplings or tapping along iron wheels. Some claim to have spotted a shadowy figure walking beside one of the old locomotives, dressed in what appears to be 19th century work attire, vanishing between cars that no one could possibly pass through. Security cameras have allegedly captured brief anomalies, movement in sealed display areas, faint mists forming near specific trains tied to tragic accidents. Skeptics argue that old metal contracts at night, that temperature shifts, cause the building to groan. But how do you explain repeated reports of the smell of coal smoke drifting through climate-controlled rooms, or the sensation of someone brushing past you in an empty corridor? The railroad built fortunes, but it also claimed lives workers crushed, passengers lost in derailments, dreams cut short by steel and steam. Perhaps those stories linger in the machinery, replaying in fragments after midnight. Or perhaps something still walks the platform, forever waiting for a train that never arrived. If you stood alone beside those silent engines and heard the faint whistle of steam behind you, would you dismiss it as imagination or realize the last departure hasn't truly happened? The Citizen Hotel, Sacramento. Elegant by design and steeped in early 20th century grandeur, the Citizen Hotel welcomes guests with polished marble, chandeliers, and the quiet hum of a historic downtown landmark. But once the lobby empties and elevator doors close for the night, the atmosphere shifts. Guests have reported waking to the sound of footsteps pacing across their rooms slow, deliberate steps that stop beside the bed before fading into silence. Others describe faucets turning on without warning, lights flickering in perfectly restored suites, and the distinct feeling that someone is standing just beyond the bathroom door. Staff members have whispered about an upper floor where motion sensors activate despite no visible movement, and security cameras briefly distort as if something passes too close to the lens. Skeptics blame old plumbing, aging wiring, the power of suggestion in a historic building. But how do you explain multiple guests in separate rooms, describing the same shadowed figure in period clothing glimpsed in mirrors before vanishing? The building's past includes decades of political gatherings, private deals, and untold personal dramas. Moments of tension that may have left an imprint within its walls. Perhaps the energy lingers, replaying fragments of unfinished stories. Or perhaps someone who once checked in never truly checked out. If you spent a night there and heard 3 slow knocks at your door at 3 a.m., only to find an empty hallway, would you assume it was a prank or wonder who still considers that room theirs? Sure. Fanny Ann's Saloon, Sacramento. In the heart of old Sacramento, Fanny Ann's Saloon glows with vintage charm dark wood walls, antique decor, and the lingering scent of aged whiskey. By evening, laughter and clinking glasses fill the air. But when closing time arrives and the music fades, the saloon's atmosphere turns unsettlingly still. Staff have reported bar stools shifting slightly on their own, glasses clinking from shelves no one has touched, and sudden cold drafts sweeping through the upstairs rooms. Some employees claim to have heard a woman's soft voice whispering near the staircase, even when the building was empty. Others describe the unmistakable sound of footsteps pacing above the bar after midnight, stopping abruptly when investigated. Skeptics argue it's the building settling, old pipes expanding and contracting. But how do you explain repeated sightings of a shadowed female figure standing near the balcony railing before dissolving into darkness? Legend suggests the spirit of Fanny herself may linger, guarding the establishment that bears her name. Perhaps it's simply the residue of decades of emotion celebrations, arguments, secrets shared over drinks, or perhaps someone refuses to leave the last call behind. If you found yourself alone locking up and heard a quiet laugh echo from the upstairs hallway, would you dismiss it as imagination or wonder who's still tending the bar after hours? Sutter, the Woodlake Hotel, Sacramento. Set slightly apart from the downtown rush, the Woodlake Hotel appears ordinary at first glance. Rows of rooms, quiet hallways, the soft glow of exterior lights reflecting off still water nearby. But guests have long described nights here that feel anything but ordinary. Some report waking abruptly to the sensation of someone sitting at the edge of the bed, only to find the room completely empty. Others speak of televisions turning on by themselves in the early hours, flickering to static before shutting off without explanation. Housekeeping staff have mentioned doors that slam despite no draft, and rooms that feel unnaturally cold even when the thermostat reads normal. One recurring account involves a shadow passing beneath the crack of the bathroom door, as if someone is pacing inside, yet the space is vacant when opened. Skeptics attribute it to faulty wiring, aging infrastructure, or sleep paralysis. But how do you explain multiple guests on different floors, describing the same figure standing silently at the end of the hallway before vanishing around a corner? Hotels collect stories, transient lives, private struggles, moments of joy and despair hidden behind closed doors. Perhaps those emotions imprint themselves into the walls, or perhaps someone who once checked in never truly left. If you were staying alone and heard a slow knock on your window from the outside, would you pull back the curtain to look, or hope whatever's out there loses interest first? The Crest Theater, Sacramento. With its glowing marquee and vintage neon lights, the Crest Theater stands as a beloved landmark in downtown Sacramento, a palace of cinema where stories flicker across the screen. But when the final credits roll and the auditorium empties, another story is set to begin. Employees have reported hearing seats creak in the dark as if unseen patrons are settling in, and the faint sound of applause echoing through an empty hall. Projectionists once claimed the booth door would open slowly on its own, accompanied by a sudden chill that lingered long after. Some visitors describe spotting a shadowy figure seated alone in the balcony during late-night screenings, only for the seat to be empty when checked. Skeptics argue it's aging infrastructure, acoustics playing tricks in a cavernous space, but how do you explain lights flickering precisely during certain scenes, or security alarms triggered in locked sections of the theater? Legends whisper of former performers and moviegoers who never truly left, their presence stitched into velvet curtains and worn carpet aisles. Perhaps it's residual energy replaying fragments of long-forgotten premieres, or perhaps someone still returns for one last show. If you stayed after closing and heard a single clap from the darkness behind you, would you bow to an invisible audience, or rush for the exit before the curtain falls again? Sutter's Fort, Sacramento. Encircled by thick adobe walls and steeped in gold rush history, Sutter's Fort stands as a preserved outpost from California's earliest frontier days. By daylight, it feels educational costumed interpreters, reconstructed rooms, the hum of curious visitors. But when night descends and the wooden gates close, the fort's atmosphere shifts into something far more unsettling. Guards have reported hearing boots crunch across the courtyard gravel long after it's been cleared, followed by the heavy thud of doors slamming within empty quarters. Some claim to have seen a lone figure standing near the blacksmith shop, dressed in 19th century attire, staring silently before dissolving into the darkness. Others describe cold spots forming near the barracks, accompanied by the faint scent of smoke, as if a fire has just been extinguished. Skeptics argue it's wind moving through old beams, imagination amplified by history. But how do you explain repeated reports of whispers echoing along the walls, or lantern-like lights flickering where no flame exists? The fort witnessed hardship, disease, betrayal, and the chaotic surge of fortune seekers chasing gold. Such intense emotion doesn't always fade quietly. Perhaps the past replays itself in fragments beneath the stars, or perhaps someone who once sought refuge within these walls never truly departed. If you stood alone in that courtyard after midnight and heard deliberate footsteps circling behind you, would you blame the wind, or realize you are not the only one still standing guard? Sacramento's past clearly lingers in more ways than one, offering a chilling invitation to those brave enough to look. These 15 sites are just the beginning. Which local legend gives you the most goosebumps? Tell us below. Stay tuned, as we'll soon be uncovering the darkest secrets and most active poltergeists from cities all over California.